in even earlier than 8 in some cases to try to ready the buildings for school.
And the way they do it too is they don't let it finish. They try to stay ahead of it as it's happening too.
I'll tell you a quick little story about the Batchelder School. It's funny, when you look at that perimeter road in front of the building, there aren't that many logical places to plow the snow to. So we actually have to hire a front-end loader now at all of the batch snowstorms, twice this year already, to remove the snow and to dump it over the other side on the fence. That's just kind of a design challenge we have there. And you know, when you're talking about, we've talked earlier this year about the elevator maintenance. There are just so many building costs that we have that I'd like to show you the detail at some later point. But that's, point being here, summary, is that that's driving some of our building maintenance costs. It's hard to keep those at 2%. So that's a brief overview of why the budget is 7.9%, or about $1.7 million higher than this year as we stand. Now, if we can move to page 3, and again, I just want to go over some of these in general summary details, and drilling down a little bit more to help understand why the budget is as it is. You note that at the top of that page, you're breaking the budget by functional category down into categories that we've been accustomed to seeing. The salary expenses are up 6.9%. That number is the present complement of staff projected into FY10. Now, one budget detail that helps explain that number is that in the this past summer of 2008, the directors of special education came to the superintendent with some recommendations pertaining to situations whereby hiring a teacher or a paraprofessional in lieu of an outplacement or in lieu of some therapy would be advantageous to the district and to the family. So there were some extra hires that took place during the summer. At the same time, there were some reductions in special education costs that kind of balanced out. So I explain that because when you're comparing the FY10 salary needs against what was originally voted for FY09 salary, it makes that number look higher because you're showing a 6.9% increase in salary because of some additional positions that were added to FY10 and kind of a parallel savings back on the expense side.
So the actual 2009, which when you give us budget updates, we're already running behind in that category. The actual 2009 will be higher than what we budgeted.
Exactly.
So you basically transferred some funds from special education or into that area to hire teachers to meet some needs that needed to be met.
Yes, and if you look at the monthly report later, you'll see that that fact. That's why we're in the red at this stage in the projected salary account. We're in the black in other areas, right. But that's proof of that point. The second line down, instructional expenses, that's also up by a large amount. You can see 9.8%. That's almost all explained by small capital. Remember, this level services budget contains expenses that may not last as we move through the budget cycle. So because it's a level services budget, there is a small capital request in this budget, whereas in FY09, if you remember, there was a reduction of small cap as we went through the process. Remember, we split small cap in half. Some of it was going to be funded at the October town meeting, and never was. So that's kind of a number issue. So if we were to, for example, remove the small capital request in FY10, that increase in instructional expenses would be 1 to 2% category or range. The third area down, row down, operations and maintenance, another large increase, 8.4%. That's mostly explained for by utilities. As I said, I'm hoping to back off a little bit. But what I'm doing is I used the October pricing levels and projected them onto next year, and maybe I now can use the December pricing models, but this is what it is at this stage. Transportation is up 7%. Most of the special education transportation costs have fuel escalators in them. That helps explain that. There's also some enhanced or increased special education expenses, special education transportation built in over and above the fuel escalation. And then moving down to tuition, you can see just a huge increase there, 11%. It's mind-boggling, really, to see a level services budget with this kind of increase. And it really presents us challenges as we move ahead, because here we are looking potentially at level funding, yet our inherent expenses, if you will, are up this much. So
well, I guess the caution there is, and I do have a question for David on this, but we don't know if other students aren't going to move in during the summer or during this school year, and that cost could increase. And the question I have for David is, if a student moves in during the school year, we assume that cost when the student moves in, the other district that they're coming from doesn't have to pay for that cost anymore?
It depends on what time of the year and
Okay.
how that works out.
Okay.
So depending on the time, we can pay some of it, and then, but once you get into the next fiscal year, you're responsible for the whole time.
Okay.
I have a question, Cal, on the salary expenses, the 6.9% increase, is it steps only? Or is that where your salary pool is?
the salary pool is included in that.
In
We
that.
can talk more about that in executive session.
Okay.
Down below on the bottom of page 3, you see a different mix. You know, you have the same bottom line, but a different way of looking at it. And once again, you see salary up by that same 6.9%, and then we've listed the individual schools there to show you what the level services expense budgets might be for the individual schools, and you see them locked in at 2%, as has been our history. And then when you move down to the so-called system-wide expenses, that's where you are accounting for many of the special education utility costs. It's just a different mix or a different way of looking at it, and then you see that small capital amount there. The grant and revolving offsets are forecast to be very similar to this year, because once again, we're assuming in this budget the same level of fees. You know, that may change too, but at this stage, we've used full-day kindergarten fees, athletic fees, all the different fees as level from this year. So as the document unfolds, you see the line-by-line detail, and it breaks it down into many of the areas I've just discussed.
Substitutes.
Yeah, Carl, I saw that a couple of them on this on page 4. The differentials is a 26% increase.
Yes.
Substitutes 25.5%.
Yes.
And then coaches 14.8%. Just the one comment on the coaches is, would we be able to move a little bit of a higher percentage from the revolving fund to cover coaching costs? I guess that's the question. But the main question is why the increase in
Okay.
differentials and substitute teachers.
Well, let's look at the page-by-page detail. That's maybe the easiest way to describe it. Let's start with differentials, and that will be on page 12. Okay, page 12. This is provides the detail of what differential comprises. And to start with, you you see the stipends that are provided to the various department heads. Those are forecast in this budget, as you can see, to be pretty much even from FY09 to FY10, the total amount there being about $96,000, 310. So that's one piece of differentials. As you move down into credits, this is where you're going to see the increase. You know, I'm looking at this, I'm embarrassed to say I can see a typo here already that I need to correct, but no.
Carl, is this
No,
the
I
same
don't.
thing though, because the
No.
versus budgeted as opposed to versus actual? Is it the same thing here with, since we have more teachers on than we budgeted for, that the differentials would then be higher in the actual, or?
No, not to, I mean, to a minor extent, you'll see that because teacher credits are factored in. As there is an increase in teachers, you're going to see an increase in teacher credit payments. But where the major increase here, Mel, is in non-teacher credits. This page doesn't display it as clearly as it might because you're comparing actual against budget. But the costs of credits that are being provided to employees took a huge increase from FY09 to FY10. As you know, Mel, there were enhancements made to the paraprofessional contract on credit payments, and that is the primary explainer for the increase in differentials. Those additional payments that are now being provided to paraprofessionals as AMS credits.
But what we're reflecting here is the actual.
Yeah, so it's not as clear. I will provide to the school committee a document that shows the FY09 budgeted
amount, right.
so that it's a little clearer.
Okay.
So, to answer your question directly, that is the major driver for
Okay.
differentials right there.
What kind of programs are the paraprofessionals engaged in?
Where this came in the contract, let's say if you're a paraprofessional and they're allowed to participate in the same kinds of programs that teachers are. So if I'm a paraprofessional and I'm working with an inclusion classroom and we have a math program or a writing program, then we would provide training for those paraprofessionals so that they can work with students. They would get in-service credit. The rate of in-service credit is every 9 credits increases the base by $275. And so to get 9 credits, 1 credit is equivalent to 10 hours of additional professional development. So you can see this takes a bit of time to pick up the 9 credits. However, in the last round of negotiations with the paraprofessionals, there was a proposal to give recognition to paraprofessionals who came into the role with previous college credit that could be applied and useful in their work, as opposed to going forward. And so that is one of the reasons why you see an increase here.
And is that something that they have to apply for and you have to approve?
Yes,
That their
correct.
past
Right.
experience or education was
Right.
useful?
The other thing is, under federal law, there is a requirement that isn't in place yet at the local level, but that would be ultimately certification for paraprofessionals. And so there's an effort to be thinking about what kind of training is necessary for paraprofessionals.
And are they still considering paraprofessionals as one group? I mean, they haven't split it into those that work directly with students or those that work with special ed versus the ones that assist in the office?
Well, it's one group in terms of the hourly rate, but within the contract, there are actually 4 different categories of paraprofessionals. There's special education inclusion, there's general paraprofessionals that do the day-to-day supervision,